let's take a look at a few more helpful keyframing tools in Max. After playing back our animation, we can see that our idle still needs some work. We should add some rotation to the aircraft just so it feels as if it's truly being influenced by the force that causes this vehicle to move. And then for our turbines, they need to rotate as well. So those are the few tasks we'll take care of in this lesson. Alright, so first let's go ahead and start with the turbines. Let's go ahead and grab our animation control here and move over to frame 0. So this is where we'd want our turbine spin to start from. Now you could see, going to our fan speed parameter, that we have a keyframe locked in with a value of 0. We can see that clearly because of this red bracket that surrounds our slider. Now if we were to go ahead and set this to a higher value, let's say 20, when we start to scrub on our track bar, you can see that there's a little bit of movement, but eventually the fans will pop back to the value that has been saved, 0. So let me go ahead and show you this. If we were to set this to 20, and on frame 0, if we were to hold down Shift and click with the right mouse button, now that value has been saved. So if we were to go ahead and scrub through, you can see that there is a bit of movement, but eventually the fans will move back to that 0 value because that is what has been saved on 40 and 80. So what we'll need to do then is go in and remove the keyframes that cause these issues. We could do so from our curve editor. We won't get too far into the curve editor in this lesson, but we're going to go ahead and use it to just kind of clean up what we have here, and then later on we'll take a more in-depth look into that really cool tool. I'm going to go ahead and right click and grab the curve editor. Now we're working with custom parameters. If you do not see your custom parameters when you load in the curve editor, they should be light blue curves. If you do not see them, one way you can show them instantly is from the show menu. You can go to auto expand and check animated. That's going to show you all of the parameters that have received keyframes. With this off, we'd have to do a little bit more digging around. We'd have to find the modified object, secondary controls, our attribute holder, custom attributes, and we'd find those custom parameters that way. So by turning on auto expand, that helps us to save some time. I really like keeping it on, and I think you will too. Let's go ahead and find fan speed. Here it is. So with it selected, we want to go in and delete the keyframe on 40. That goes back to a value of 0. Let's go ahead and select it and press the delete key on our keyboard. Now we wouldn't want to delete the keyframe on 80 because with cycles we want our first and last frames to be identical. That helps us to, again, make sure that when we're creating our cycles, if we need to offset any keys or anything like that, we already know that a keyframe exists in our range, so we can do so safely. So we could go ahead and take this key on 80, and let's go ahead and set it to the same value of the key on 0. Now you can see that that value is 20. We can see that clearly from looking at our key stats. So this is really neat. We can go ahead and change our frame count from here. We could also change our value count from here. So this is the value we want to use, 20. We'll go ahead and grab the keyframe on 80, and in the value stat we'll go ahead and set this to 20. Alright, great. So now, closing out the curve editor, what you'll see is that our turbines will now spin. Very exciting. Okay, so that's one thing down. Let's go ahead and take a look at a few other keyframing options we have. Let's go ahead and take a look at the motion panel next. So here we can create transform keys under our PRS parameters rollout. We're going to add some rotation between our major poses here, or major keyframes. These are major keys because these are the main storytelling keys. From these we know that we're animating an idle. So now it's time to add a bit of polish or icing on the cake by adding in-betweens. So we can go to frame 20, and the way this works is we'd first want to create the keyframe we'd like to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and create a rotation key. Notice it has now been added. And then the next thing we'll want to do is go to that keyframe. We'll go to our rotation list here, and that will show us the value that we'd like to tweak. Now sometimes you may need to go ahead and update this information by switching over to one transform list and then switching back to the one you'd like to tweak. Doesn't happen all the time, but it's really simple. We just need to update that. But what we could do now is start to adjust the value. So we could start to increase this to tilt our aircraft. Remember, we want to keep this subtle, so we could bring this to about a value of 2. It's very close. We could go ahead and leave it at 2.1, but for your values to match mine, I'll go ahead and have this set to 2. And what you'll see is that now we're having a little bit of rotation in our aircraft, which is really nice. Now, if you want the values of a specific channel here, because right now we don't know for sure what value we're taking a look at, but we do know precisely what we've tweaked by taking a look at our Euler parameters. So if you were to take a look, you could see that the x-axis is actually what has been tweaked. If I were to set this to the y-axis, I bet the value is going to be 0 because we haven't tweaked the y-axis of our aircraft at all. Alright, so that's a way we can read what we are tweaking. So what I'd like to do is go in and add another keyframe on the next in-between, which is frame 60. But this time, let's go ahead and add the reciprocal so that we have a seamless idle. So since this is positive 2, we could go ahead and have this set to negative 2. Now here I'd like to introduce you to auto key. Let's go ahead and click on our auto key button. We'll go ahead and make sure that we're focused on the x-axis again, what we're animating in. And take a look. When we start to rotate, you'll see that instantly a keyframe has been added and the value has been saved. So this helps us to save time. We just need to be very careful with it on, because if we're not careful, we can go ahead and pose our ship. Let's say we're just testing out a pose, only to realize that we have overwritten a keyframe that we liked. In the simple example, it's not too big of a deal, but when you're dealing with complex animations that involve creatures, well then that's when it becomes a problem. So we just want to be very careful about that. This is simple to fix. We can select the keyframe right here on 69, and we can use the delete key on our keyboard to remove it. Alright, so we just want to be very careful with auto key. If you want to test a pose, do so in set key mode. Just go ahead and pose your ship. A keyframe should have already been saved on all of the axes that you have adjusted the object in. So what that means is if you don't like the pose, you could just go ahead and scrub on the track bar and it will revert back. Now, another very important thing I want to point out is what happens when we start to tweak our animations without being in any key mode. If we were to go ahead and turn off set key and revert back to Max's normal state, if we were to now go to our move tool and move our aircraft up, notice the aircraft is not going to pop back at all. It's going to stay at that offset. That's just how Max works. If we want to create keyframes, we need to be in either set key or auto key modes. If we're not ready to set any keyframes, we could go ahead and turn those off. Now, is this a problem? Well, it can be, this offset that we could do in Max. But sometimes we just want to go in and actually create an offset quickly. If our character needs to be a bit higher, we could go ahead and turn those key modes off and lift our character up, and now the character is higher. So in some cases this is very advantageous, but in a lot of cases you already know the height your character needs to be at, so you just want to make sure that you're working in your key modes. Now let me go ahead and show you what has happened if I were to go ahead and undo back and go to frame 40 where we have set a position Z keyframe. I'll go to the position list here and I'll make sure that it's the Z axis that we're focused on. We could go back down to the position X, Y, Z parameters rollout here just to make sure of that. So you can see our value is set to 3. But once we start to lift this up, our value is no longer at 3. We now have created a 16 unit offset or so. About 15 or 16 unit offset. Alright, so we just need to be very careful when we're not using our key modes. All right, so what I'll do is go ahead and turn back on set key so we can make sure that we keep the work that we have worked hard on in this lesson. All right, so now that we have an idea of how to add keyframes a few other ways in 3ds Max, the next thing I'd like to show you is how to edit keyframes on 3ds Max's trackbar.